Hey, this is Dominick, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominick and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. My name is Dominick Quartuccio, and I'm one of your co-hosts on this journey, and you're going to be hearing from Brian Stacy here in a few minutes. If this is your very first time tuning into the Great Man Within podcast, welcome aboard. If you've recently discovered us over the last few months and you want to bring yourself up to speed as to where we've been and catch up on anything you may have missed, this is also an awesome place to be. And if you have been listening from the very beginning, we love you. Thank you for being such a great supporter. And thank you for allowing us to reach as many new listeners and as many new men through your support, through your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, and for sharing this with other men in your life who you care about. Our belief on this show is that every man has a great man living within him. We see this in all of the movies that we love, like Neo in The Matrix, who at the very beginning of the movie was living an uninspired existence until Morpheus comes along and sees greatness in him and says, "You are the chosen one." We've seen this in Star Wars with Luke, who has the power of the Force inside of him, and then Obi-Wan and Yoda, his mentors, enter and tell him that he's got powers beyond his greatest imagination. We see this in Forrest Gump when he runs and breaks free from the shackles that have constrained his lower body for most of his life. He's no longer someone who's disabled. He's someone with superhuman strength. Every single man has a great man living inside of him if he has the courage to go on the inner journey and do that inner work. Most men will settle for simply what's good enough. A life of safety, a life of predictability, a life of controlling your world to such a small extent so you can avoid every ounce of pain or discomfort. And then at the end of your life, you end up living what's called the definition of hell, which is at the end of your life, when you're taking your last breaths, the man that you became meets the man that you could have become. I don't know about you, but that is my greatest fear in life. That would be the greatest regret. And I don't have regrets as I live this life. But that ending up with my last breaths on earth, knowing that I didn't live to my fullest potential, that I chose to play it safe because of fear, that I left chips on the table, that is the definition of hell. And for those of you who have been listening, and those of you who are considering whether to listen, if you resonate with that, if that is the thing that you want to avoid at the end of your life, then I'm pretty sure that you found yourself in the right place. We believe that a great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive. A great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive, which means a great man is not just in it for himself. He's in it for himself and to elevate and generate life and growth and prosperity and abundance for the people that he cares about as well. And you're going to hear us relying upon some very influential texts and books that we've read in our lives, like Robert Moore's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, which is where from the king archetype, I borrowed that statement of creating environments where you and those you care about can thrive. You're going to hear us leveraging the wisdom of Napoleon Hill in Outwitting the Devil and Think and Grow Rich, which are some of the most influential books of my life. The Way of the Superior Man by David Data, which is a man's guide to mastering purpose and challenges of women and work. A great man lives out over his edge constantly in everything that he does. And those are words inspired by David Data in his book, The Way of the Superior Man. And we believe that a great man knows where his edges are. He knows where his limits are. He doesn't push too far past them, nor does he shrink away from them. He leans out over his edge to see what he is capable of. That is where growth is. That is where purpose is. That is where your calling is. And we believe that by befriending fear, recognizing its source in your life of strength and as of direction and that next right action in your life is what matters for living a life of meaning and intentionality. A great man does not allow himself to drift through life unconsciously, being pushed around by what's easy, by running on autopilot. And Bryan and I are going to go deep into the conversation of what drift means in a few moments here today. A great man is constantly connected to his purpose. He lives a life of passion, and he is always looking to upgrade his performance. Purpose, passion, and performance. Purpose means that you are leaving this world a better place than how you found it. You are living your calling. Passion means that you are inspired by the life that you are living. Performance means that you are showing up day in and day out, knowing the things that contribute to your optimal physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual well-being. A great man knows that personal development on his own is slow and shallow and incomplete. A great man knows that he only thrives and only accelerates as fast as he's capable of while around other great men committed to doing the same thing. And that's why a big part of our work is not just podcasting, not just talking, but going out and doing the inner work. Bryan and I founded the Great Man Mastermind, which is a group of 20 high-performing men who are coming together over the course of the next year to live their purpose, to live a life of passion, to optimize their performance so they can go back into their families, into their communities, into their businesses as leaders and create environments where they and those they care about can thrive. Because ultimately, underpinning all of this, the big North Star, the mission that is driving the work that I do, is that over the next 10 years, I want to help 10 million men wake up to their greatest potential and get on the path of doing inner work on themselves so they can create environments where they and those they care about can thrive. And a final word before Bryan joins us. The reason why we're recording this episode is because another great man by the name of Michael Young, who is one of the 20 men in the Great Man Mastermind, said, "Hey, Dominick, I think this would be a really good time for you to do an intro episode for many of your new listeners because you have grown and evolved this show dramatically over the last year and a half." And he's right. Actually, when we first started the show almost a year and a half ago, we were called the Man Amongst Men podcast, which never really resonated much with Bryan and I or you, our listeners. And the great man within is something that strikes a much deeper chord for all of us. But if you go back and listen to the first 30 or 40 episodes, you're going to hear the intro music of the Man Amongst Men podcast. So that's where that's coming from. And also, over recent months, you're going to hear me doing a lot more solo episodes because during the quarantine era, I made this commitment to doing daily podcasts to help you fortify your inner foundation during the times of change. And that leads me to the last question that Michael Young asked us to answer for our newer listeners, which is, you hear that Bryan and I are going to talk a lot about this concept of inner work. What is inner work and why does it matter? You see, most of us have built our entire lives around controlling all of the external variables in our life and arranging them in a way that we can finally feel good about ourselves on the inside. Whether that's going after a job, making a certain amount of money, getting the woman that you want or the man that you want, having the family, having all the things on paper that you thought would make you happy. And as soon as those things are in order, then maybe you feel some sense of peace on the inside. But it's a really fragile existence because as soon as one of those external variables change, then you feel discontent on the inside. And right now, as I'm recording this, we are in week 9 of the quarantine era. I've had a chance to see how many people have built their entire lives around making sure the external world is perfectly aligned. And as soon as that is stripped from them, there's chaos, there's pain, and there's suffering. Viktor Frankl, who wrote The Man's Search for Meaning, was a Holocaust survivor. He spent 3 years in concentration camps. He had his family stripped from him and exterminated and killed. He was beaten. He was starved. He had every freedom imaginable taken from him. His external world was completely controlled by everybody but him. And yet, in A Man's Search for Meaning, he has the wisdom to share that when we can no longer change our situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. He had no control over his situation. So the only thing that he had control over was changing his inner state. He was able to make the decision to bring hope and to find meaning in the most hopeless of circumstances. It's what gave him a reason to survive, to write the books that he's written, to heal millions and tens of millions of people in the decades that have followed, and to provide hope and inspiration. He is a great teacher on the reason why we need to do inner work. Going inward allows you to find your power source. It allows you to find what matters to you. It allows you to find what your calling is. It allows you to build a sturdy foundation so when the tornado of change and chaos is swirling all around you, you can be clear, confident, and courageous and know what that next step forward is. That, my friend, makes you a powerful leader. That makes you magnetic to the romantic interests in your life. That is what creates a life worth living. Because the men who are standing upon a foundation of inner work are not only surviving this period of time of change and turmoil, but they are thriving. They are becoming stronger as a result, just like Viktor Frankl did during his 3 years of hell on earth. He came out a stronger man. And for you, every episode that we record, every interview that we do with an outside expert, every solo episode that I share from my heart is always for the same reason, to help you discover and live the great man within you. Life has a way of sending us wake-up calls, right? Wake-up calls that we are not living the greatest version of ourselves. And we oftentimes ignore the feather or the tap on the shoulder that's like, hey, over here, like there's something to be doing differently. I wrote something down in my journal one day. It was just kind of like there's 3 types of men, the 3 types of ways that we're living our lives with respect to these wake-up calls. And I'll read this to you. Cursed is the man with the ability to ration out his quiet desperation and subtle torment to the degree where he can endure it over the course of a lifetime where very little changes. Fortunate is the man who is shaken awake so completely and thoroughly that he has no choice but to make the change that he's been dreaming about. Victorious is the man who lives a life of his own design, courageously embarking on the journey of living the great man within. Now, what we're talking about here is when I say that, cursed is the man with the ability to ration out his quiet desperation. Henry David Thoreau is the one who writes about, in the book Walden, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation, of living a life where they feel that they're capable of more but don't know how to do it, or feeling like they don't have the freedom that, Bryan, you just described, or that they're being pulled around by societal expectations, or they're stuck in a life of obligation, right? Because it's, I have to make ends meet. Most men will know how to ration out their torment of quiet desperation over the course of a life where it's like not killing them, but it's also like not bad enough to make a change. And then you'll end up living a life where at the end of your life, you feel like you left chips on the table. So let's talk about one of the number one enemy to living a powerful life, the number one enemy to finding and living the great man within you. And that is this concept of drift. And so I may go on a bit of a monologue here for a moment. Bryan, please interject at any point in time. But drifting is a really powerful concept for you to understand. And we will encourage you to go back. I think it's to the 2nd episode where we do an entire episode on the number one enemy to living a powerful life. So Napoleon Hill is one of our mentors posthumously, because he was dead decades before I think either one of us were born. Napoleon Hill is responsible for writing the number one best-selling business and personal development book of all time called Think and Grow Rich. Now, he did his best work during the Great Depression era, and his mentor was a man by the name of Andrew Carnegie of Carnegie Steel, billionaire, titan. And Andrew Carnegie said to Napoleon, if you want to learn how the most successful people in the world became successful, go out and interview 500 of the most successful people in the world and mine their secrets and write that book. Napoleon went and did that. He ended up interviewing the Henry Fords, the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers, King Gillette, J.P. Morgan, Charles Schwab, mined their secrets, wrote the book, Think and Grow Rich. And I think that was written in 1937. But the secondary piece of advice that Andrew Carnegie gave him was much more interesting to me. And he said, but if you want to understand the full human experience, not just the most successful, but all of humanity, Go out and interview 10 times as many of those people at the end of their lives who felt like they left chips on the table, who felt like they didn't live their fullest potential. Talk to them and find out how they ended up there living a life of regret. So Napoleon Hill made that the central part of his mission. Over the 25-year period, he ended up interviewing, according to Hill, 25,000 of those people, right? Like he averaged 1,000 of those interviews per year over a 25-decade period of time. Just think about what that does on a daily basis. He unpacked their secrets and wrote the book, Outwitting the Devil, which was so controversial that his family and his estate, buried for 70 or 80 years, would not allow him to release it because he takes some big shots at some education systems, religious institutions, even though Napoleon Hill was very spiritual and religious himself. And that book was not released until 2011, I believe, during the Great Recession, the tail end of the Great Recession. So Think and Grow Rich came out during the Great Depression. Outwitting the Devil came out during the Great Recession. And I ended up reading that book during Hurricane Sandy when I was living here in New York, still living here in New York City. 5 days of blackout, no lights, no electricity, no Wi-Fi, no running water. And I ended up reading these words that forever changed my life. And I want to share them with you and the fact that maybe they will shake you up. This book is a distillation of those 25,000 stories of dreams that were lost. And the story is told through Napoleon Hill interviewing the devil. And the devil is speaking to Napoleon when he says these words. I enter the minds of people through habit. And through this principle, I establish the habit of drifting. And when I get a person to drift, I can lead him straight towards the gates of hell. And what the devil is saying is that we think we are making conscious decisions in our everyday life of how we choose to go about our day, how we design our lives, when in actuality, it's our unconscious, it's drift, it's our habits and patterns and unconscious belief systems. It's our societal expectations. It's what our parents taught us. It's what your lover is telling you to do or expecting you to do. It's what your boss is teaching or telling you to do. That's actually behind the steering wheel of your car, and you are sitting in the back seat or stuffed in the trunk for most of your life, getting dragged around by drift. And it's only when an outside force thrusts itself upon you, do you wake up from this state of drift, from this hypnotic rhythm, and recognize, holy shit, I'm not in control of my life the way that I thought I was.
And Dom, I want to interject on this one because this gets into where we were at in life, right? Numb by drift, able to rationalize how we were actually feeling. And for me, the wake-up call, right? The Mack truck was living a life of in corporate America, by all means, pretty happy, going after my quote dreams. And I was diagnosed with testicular cancer and chlamydia on the same day. It took me 3 months from the time that I started feeling that to actually go in and talk to a doctor.
What was it you were feeling?
I felt the physical symptoms of my left nut, right? Changing shape and actually getting smaller and everything else. But even that wasn't enough of a wake-up call for me to go in and get the help that I needed. And that decision could have killed me, right? If I let that continue to go on, that very well could have killed me. And so the wake-up call for me, Don, and that was the first time I started asking some of these what I call inner work type questions, which is my identity. I started to realize at that point in time was so wrapped around my sexuality and my performance in sexuality and what I thought I was doing performance-wise at work. And when I started asking questions like, wait a second, like, am I going to survive this? Can I still have kids? Can I still perform sexually? It made me look at life in a completely different way. Now, there's collateral damage involved with that, right? That's what happens when a Mack truck hits you.
For sure.
But it woke me up from drift to figure out what I really, really wanted in life and what was really important to me. And taking each day after being diagnosed with cancer with a new look at opportunity. And that was just the beginning, right? That was the very beginning of the journey. And it's been now 9 years since then.
Yeah.
But for me, like, I didn't know I was in drift, and it took something that big to wake me up.
Yeah, none of us do. And you know, to use your analogy from earlier, like you had the feather tickling your nut for the first month or so, kind of like, hey, this thing is getting bigger. What's going on? And you ignored it because as guys, we like to ignore things, hope they go away until it's no longer ignorable. And you're lucky that you had a friend who's a urologist who you're like, hey, I think
by the way,
my nut is twice the size that it usually is. Do I got a problem? And he's like, fuck, dude.
In the quote that you gave, Dom, earlier, you talk about the ability to rationalize things away. Right? Back then, it seems ridiculous now as we're sitting here, but I was like, my nut's getting bigger. Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, who doesn't want bigger nuts? This is great. Right? Like, and so it's so easy to rationalize some of this stuff to say, like, actually, this is what I want. And the question is it really? Like, is your nut getting 2 times the size in a few months really better? I don't think it is.
And I don't know how many guys sit up like late at night dreaming about getting bigger nuts, like bigger dicks, maybe. Bigger nuts, though. I don't know if that was a thing for you.
Well, listen, as a one nut guy, I would appreciate having just another nut, let alone some nice big nut. I'm okay with that.
Fair enough. Anyway, so what Bryan's talking about is like he got his wake up call, right? And what most of us need in order for us to actually sit up and take a deeper look at our lives is this wake up call. And it's usually either the 2x4 across the face or the Mack truck that hits you. And here's the deal. When you get woken up from drift in that way, it can be an amazing trajectory changer, right? When that outside force thrusts itself upon you and wakes you up, I'm willing to bet that you who are listening right now have had some shitty experiences in your life, turmoil, times of testing to your limits, that when you were going through it, it was torture for you. And you would never wish that experience upon anyone, but it's what made you the man that you are today, right? Because it caused you to grow. So those experiences can be some of the best and deepest and most meaningful moments of your life. But my question to you is, if the only thing that is catalyzing change in your life is an outside force thrusting itself upon you, then how in control of your life are you really? If you're constantly waiting for the 2x4 or the Mack truck, how in control of your life are you really? And, Bryan, I would say got away easy. In the sense of like you were able to go and get treatment, you were able to get cured, and you are healthy and happy, and you have elevated as a result. There are so many men who get the Mack truck that run them over completely and don't ever wake up, right? Like they have the heart attack and don't survive it, right? Like they have their heart broken and like they learn how to mend. Let's not go that far. Like everything that we talk about here is you learning how to wake yourself up from drift.
Yeah, and one of the most difficult things about doing the inner work is facing those patterns, those parts of ourselves that we actually don't like or want to change, but are too afraid to look at. And I know for me, the avoidant tendencies, right? I call it avoidant Bryan, was so avoidant that he wouldn't look at his nut changing in size. Mm-hmm. Now, my look into what needs to change can happen through a thought, can happen in a meditation, can happen through a reflection or a piece of feedback that someone gives me that I'm now open to.
Absolutely.
And that is not easy work, but it is a lot faster than waiting for Mack trucks to come your way and a lot less collateral damage. So if you're feeling slow, like the progress is slow, then you're probably not in the inner work.
Right on. And when you're in the inner work, progress and growth and the things that you want happen so rapidly. It's almost like you've got a cheat code to the video games, right? It can feel that way sometimes. I'll get into in a few moments here, like what my Mack truck was that forever changed my life and why I'm also so passionate, as passionate as Bryan is, about consciously and intentionally designing my own life. And I wrote a book called Design Your Future. It was the first book that I wrote, which was really about like 3 steps to stop drifting and take command of your life. To put a capstone on the inner work and the question that Michael Young asked, it's like, okay, well, why should I care about inner work? Why should I want to do inner work? Well, as I've had a chance to see during this COVID era, the 2 types of men that I've seen, I kind of put into these categories of the men who have done inner work prior to COVID, the men who have not done any inner work prior to COVID. And I can see the 2 of these groups responding and reacting very differently over these last 9 weeks. The men who have a foundation of inner work, who have stabilized their inner sense of being, who know where their power center is, who know what their purpose is, who have tools to help them, like whether it's meditation or reflection or a brotherhood, like guys that they can open up to and rely upon and support. The guys who have that, no doubt, have experienced hardships over the last 9 weeks, But this is almost like a challenge for them to become stronger. These are guys who are going in and like becoming diamonds through the pressure of the last 9 weeks, even amidst the hardship. The other category of guys who have not done the inner work, who still rely upon all of the external forces of the outside world to tell them whether they're okay. These guys are struggling, flailing. The center, like the floor has been taken out from underneath them. There's no judgment here whatsoever. It's just that they don't have that stable foundation to stand upon. That's where Viktor Frankl, right, who had that strong inner foundation when his whole world was stripped from him, he had this ability to stand on something eternal that allowed him to say, no one can ever take my hope from me. No one can ever take this idea of me making meaning out of the situation. So as terrible as the outside world was, he felt safe somewhere inside. That's why inner work matters, because like that's the place you find your greatest source of strength and power.
Dom, those two types of guys that you're talking about as we're going through coronavirus, one is externally orientated. Mm-hmm. They're taking in the news. They are a victim to actually the external world that is happening, right? That is a scary, scary, not very free place to be.
Correct.
Whereas the other type of guy is looking and they're quicker to move and quicker to recognize like what has changed and what they can do. That's an internal orientation to how do I react to the reality of what is? How do I want to be in this new reality as opposed to I wish it was different?
Right.
That's an internal orientation, which is that's where the freedom lies.
Hell yeah. It's where the freedom lies. And it's also like what becomes magnetic. Like when you are internally stable and like when you know where your power center is, then other people can feel your confidence. They can feel your clarity and conviction. That makes you more trustworthy as a leader. It makes you more credible as a leader. It makes you super attractive to the, romantic partner or partners in your life. Because like when you're fucking stable, man, like there's nothing more magnetic than that.
To steal a term from Mind Valley and Vishen Lakhiani, you become unfuckwithable.
Right on.
And it's not unfuckwithable because you don't feel anything. And like, no matter what you do, you can't penetrate me. That's not it. Unfuckwithable is being able to read and feel and take it all in and still have that inner core that is you.
Bingo. And that'll get into something we're going to talk about a little bit later around how to cultivate emotional fluency, right? Because most guys, like we've been taught from a very early age not to feel feelings. Emotions are the enemy to performance. And then over the course of time, we perform really well, but we don't feel anything anymore. Our light starts to dim. We don't know if we like feel passion or excitement. We're not inspired by our own lives. Well, it's because we've shut off our emotions. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's so important central to the work that we do here. Let me hit on kind of like a summary format about where I got my Mack truck, right? So I was the guy for most of my life who did what I was supposed to do. I thrived on external praise, whether it was from coaches, parents, school teachers, priests. I was the guy who wanted to get the A+. I wanted to be the guy who was hitting the home run. I wanted to be the guy that was chosen as the leader of the fraternity or chosen as the leader in the corporate space. And I just kind of followed this default existence. And it brought me some spoils in my life, meaning, I worked for Prudential Financial for 15 years coming out of college. It was the only company I worked for, Fortune 100 company. I made good money. I was able to rise up through the ranks. I was seen as a leader in the business. But that was the public Dominick, right? Who kind of put this image out to the world that everyone that I felt would be loved, that would be appreciated, that would be respected. And yet there was this private Dominick where all my fears and insecurities lied, where I didn't know, what to do with them. There was a big part of my sexuality that was there too, because at a very early age, I discovered sex and porn and masturbation and Playboy magazines, where I was raised in a house where we didn't talk about that stuff. So I felt it was wrong. I could be punished for it. I grew up Catholic, spending 7 years as an altar boy and going to Catholic school where I thought that I would go to hell. Like that was my interpretation of what I learned was I would go to hell for having sexual thoughts, for masturbating. And when I got to the 7th or 8th grade years where I started discovering masturbation in school, kids would say, oh, if you're a masturbator, like you're a pervert, like you'd be a pariah, you'd be ostracized, you would like not have friends anymore. So all of like my natural sexual feelings that every like young boy discovers at a certain point, I felt were wrong, sinful, punishable, and made me a pariah. But at the same point in time, these were like the greatest feelings in the world.
Yeah, good luck getting rid of those feelings.
Right? So like I developed this really private habit of escaping from my life, escaping from stresses, escaping from feelings of pressure in my teenage years. And that created this private world of Dominick that I kept completely separate for decades until finally, for the first time in my life, I found a woman who I'd fallen in love with because I didn't think I was capable of love because I'd had these like two worlds that were completely walled off from one another. I never let anyone get close enough to me. She was able to get inside me deeper than any woman had before. And yet I had conditioned myself over the course of such a long period of time of numbing out, of healing all my wounds, of escaping, of, anytime I felt overwhelmed or isolated alone, I would go to sex or sexting other women, that even when I was in this committed relationship with this woman who I loved, I couldn't stop sexting other women. And she caught me. And my two worlds of public and private Dominick finally collapsed for the first time, and she exposed me. That was the time that I entered Sex Addicts Anonymous back in 2013 for a period of 4 years to really start to heal my relationship with my sexuality, to integrate those public and private worlds, to heal that relationship with her. And that was like to go to the darkest parts of myself and to really like reveal and heal some of these old wounds that I'd lived with for most of my life was quite literally a dying of my old former self and a birth of the man that you're hearing speak today, who is no longer walled off from his emotions, no longer disconnected from what he truly wants, no longer controlled by his impulses, no longer holding secrets. And, Bryan, you talk about that concept of freedom. I had no freedom in the world that I was operating in for 33 or 34 years of my life because I was constantly in fear of being discovered, being pulled around by all these other compulsions.
Yeah. And what if somebody found out about the private dom, right? That was the fear-based state that doesn't allow for freedom or creativity to exist. And when I look at you today, Dom, you're a guy that is not fearless.
I got fears. Yeah.
You've got fears, but there's also not this fear that you're going to be found out.
Boom.
Right? Like your worlds have aligned, and I think aligned is probably the best word. You're coming from that same source.
Yes.
Right. So I think that when we talk about freedom and what we really want is like, do I feel free to be truly who I am?
Yeah.
In every moment, in every interaction, regardless of consequences.
Hell yeah. And that is the ultimate freedom. And what I will say is what I've learned from telling that story. And, you did an amazing job interviewing me on a 2-part series. I think it's one of our first 10 episodes where it's Dominick's 4 years through Sex Addicts Anonymous. And there's a 2-part series we did. It's one of our top first 10 episodes if you go back in time and listen to it. Most of our listeners are not sex addicts, never have been, never will be. But almost every man has been able to find a part of himself in that story, whether it's being a workaholic, whether it's like being scarce with his financial situation, whether it's having challenges with emotional eating and fluctuating weight, or too much alcohol, or too much having an unhealthy relationship with drugs, or having an unhealthy relationship with porn, even though it wouldn't be classified as a sex addict. Almost every guy has been able to find himself in that story about public and private lives and what we put forward, because that's what we think will be loved or appreciated or valued. And we hide the rest of ourselves. And like you just said, Bryan, this was really, really important, of the fear of being found out. If anyone saw that part of me, then some part of my love would be taken away. Some part of my respect would be taken away. And the work that we do is so important around integration so that I don't feel afraid of sharing any part of myself anymore.
Yeah. To put a bow on this section of drift and Outwitting the Devil and Napoleon Hill that you were talking about, his book, if you're looking for the areas in your life in which drift might be there, Dominick's story was around sex expression. A lot of people have drift in when it comes to food and habits around food. For me, part of it was self-expression, not being able to fully express who I am because I was too avoidant to actually deal with the reality that what was. So 3 is self-expression. Power over others, material wealth, knowledge, right? These are all areas that for each man, right? We all have these areas of drift in our life, but 1 or 2 of those is going to be more prevalent. So I'd refer back to that original podcast that we did on Drift to look at those different areas, because for Dominick and I, they were very different, but they were both access points into a new world for ourselves.
Very well said, man. So why don't we move into this category of like, what do we talk about on the podcast, right? Like, what are some of the categories and what can you expect to learn as you're listening? So what we cover here really falls into 3 categories: purpose, passion, and performance.
I'm sorry. Purpose, passion, and performance. Yes. And I was going to say, really what we talk about in this podcast is just how to keep your dick healthy. Ultimately.
That is one of our episodes, one of our more popular episodes, which is called How to Keep Your Dick Healthy. And that would fall probably under the passion category and performance probably as well. So like real quickly, purpose is connected to the great man that's within you, living a life of your own calling, leaving this world a better place than how you found it, right? That's like purpose. Passion is, are you lit up and inspired by your own life? You know, like, do you have something on the horizon that gives you that sense of like, you know, like when you were a child and your birthday was coming up, like that sense of, you know, unbridled enthusiasm for the future. Do you feel when you look at what's on your horizon, that sense of like, I got a little bit of throw up in my mouth because I'm so nervous about this big game I'm about to play, right? Like that's living a life of passion. And also all things under the arena of sex and your romantic life. Is your sex life filled with magnetism and exploration and nourishing sexuality versus like this secretive, exhausting, depleting, you know, sexuality?
And I'm going to compare that to where you were before, where sexuality was something to be shunned, that wasn't okay, unless, of course, you're married, then it's okay, and you have to have it all figured out. Compared to now, we did a podcast and a whole live event on if this year was your best sexual and relationship and intimate year ever, what would it look like?
Right.
Now we're like procreating, we're designing what we actually want in this very important part of our life in a healthy way.
That's right. Like where sexuality can become generative in your life, versus like being used to modulate how your stress levels, or to use it to numb out, or to use it to escape. And like most men don't have that kind of relationship, that conscious relationship with their sexuality where it's generative, life-giving. It oftentimes becomes depleting or secretive. And then this final category of performance, like we are constantly refining our skills around how we optimize our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. How are you showing up as the best version of yourself in your everyday life? And I think it would be kind of helpful to go through some of the episodes that we've done that fall into each of these categories so that you, our listener, could go back and say, oh, that sounds like a great place that I would like to start. I would say when it comes to purpose, a couple of the episodes that come to mind, and we've already talked about a few of them, going back to, I think one of the first 3 or 5 episodes we released is the episode entitled The Number One Enemy to Living a Powerful Life, which is drifting. And that conversation helps you to see what stays in the way of you connecting to purpose in your life. And then Bryan and I have also done a number of episodes on design the next year of your life and design the next decade of your life. And that is having an intentional focus on if the next year of your life could be the most meaningful, fulfilling, and prosperous year of your life, or the next decade could be the most meaningful, prosperous, and fulfilling decade of your life. What would it look like? Are you on track to living that, doing the things that you're doing now? Go to those episodes because we ask you some really important questions about how you're living your life right now. We have a meditation visualization that you can listen to at the end of those episodes. And we also make those meditations available for free download at doinnerwork.com/resources that allows you to visualize what you want to look like 1 year from now, 10 years from now in the life that you're living that you'd be inspired by.
Yeah, I think some of my favorites in that category is we did one episode on morning routines.
Oh, yeah.
And what that looks like for you and I, which are fairly similar, and what it could look like for you as a listener. And then we did another one, the brother-sister combo here of we had morning routines, and the second one we did was nighttime routines, in which, Dominick, your and I nighttime routine could not look more different. Those two like really help the bookends of our day so that I wake up and I get in a great state so I can live that great man within. And then going to bed, I still got some work to do.
Yeah, I'm going to link all these in the show notes, but the morning routine one is called 11 Ideas to Design Your Morning Routine. There's another one that I did more recently. I think it was just released in the past couple months. I think it was Design Your Morning Routine Quick Guide. And it's like a 25-minute solo episode that I did. That's a great way to get started also. And then I think it's, is your evening routine sabotaging you? Or like 10 ways your evening routine may be sabotaging you is the way that we did that evening routine episode.
Dominick, another category that I love is that we take a lot of cues from the women in our audience and the women mentors that we have that come and bring their genius to our show.
That's right.
One of those episodes is when we interviewed Madeline Moon.
Yeah.
And the title is 5 Ways Men Lose Credibility with Women.
That's right.
And it was fascinating because it was an inside look at some of the things that I was doing in my life that I didn't even know was having an impact on many women that I deal with. And when I started to clean up just these little micro actions that took no more effort, I started to see a shift in relationships
100%.
With the women in my life. So I think I love that aspect of our podcast of bringing women in, hearing their perspective and what they have to say about the men in their lives and men in general.
Hell yeah. Yeah, she was fantastic. We do bring a lot of women on the show who are coaches of other women who come and tell us these are the things that women are talking about, what they want in their men. Bryan, you and I go and do a lot of speaking to women-only groups. Like I've run women's retreats for high-performing women in male-dominated environments. You and I have spoken to women entrepreneurial groups. You and I have gone to women's events in like the sexual health space, consent conversations, and we have a chance to be like the only guys in the room many times where women are like giving it to us straight about what it is that they want. And Madeline did a really great job of like putting those 5 ways that men lose credibility with women, not to browbeat us. It's actually very much from a standpoint of, and here's how, like you can become the most trustworthy, safe, and sexy man in your woman's life. And that's always the tone that we bring when we invite women to be interviewed on our show is show us, right? Like the greatest version of ourselves, speak to the great man within us. I would say one of my favorite episodes, this is something I think that you and I still kind of like are amused by. We run a podcast for men, and the number 1 most downloaded episode by far is a man's guide to the menstrual cycle, right? When we brought on Alexandra and Shawnee onto the podcast, and they run the Red School, which is a school for women, teaching them how to tap into the power of their menstrual cycle and what are the 4 seasons of the menstrual cycle to organize their lives' best energy around that. We wanted to bring them on. We were the first men who'd ever reached out to them, and I think in their 40 years worth of doing work in this space, who have ever had them on a men's podcast or a men's like platform. And we asked them to teach us, what are the 4 seasons of a woman's menstrual cycle? Winter, spring, summer, and fall. What changes might she be going through so we can understand? And then what might we need to know as men? What do we need to do, or what could we be of service for the women in our lives during that, instead of being like oh, she's crazy, like she's bleeding and, like I'll come back when, a week from now when she's normal. Instead, actually being like conscious, inquisitive men who are actively like expanding our perspective around something that's super central to many women's lives.
This is a topic that if I just read the title of, like menstrual cycles, I think I would just stop at those 2 words. I would just be like, nope, not for me. Like I don't have menstrual cycles. So good to go here. Yeah. Thank you. And I would move on. Yet that podcast, number 1 downloaded, and that podcast by itself has changed my language and what I talk about with women in a more powerful way than any other podcast that we've done. With my partner, Becca, we talk about the cycles in the 4 seasons using that language. I've had conversations with my sisters about what their view is when they're going through that period of their life. And they were shocked that I even asked the question.
Yes.
And it was fascinating to hear. And so if we truly love, what is a more beautiful thing to understand? Like, I actually think that's probably even a better word than love is like, let me understand you. And this is a great podcast, a great intro to understanding the women's cycle and how the impact is on their life and how we can be part of it.
Totally. And so many women celebrated the fact that we did that episode. And it was something to pay attention to, guys, because like when women feel seen, heard, understood, they become the biggest amplifiers and champions of you. And that's not the reason to do it, but it's a great side benefit, right? Like Bryan and I just wanted to become smarter and also to teach you, our audience. But the women who came up and celebrated that has been fantastic.
Dom, this is a really, really good point on this one really quick, because I think that we don't have to use this stuff as a tactic.
It shouldn't be.
To do it because like women, it shouldn't be. And none of this has to be because you're altruistic. I didn't get into any of this work because I wanted to understand women better.
Right.
I had a sexual health company that I ran, and I had to understand my customers. So I started asking questions and going to women-run events, and I stayed open to it. That was it. That was not an altruistic reason to do these sort of things, but I learned a lot.
That's right.
And so this stuff, the stuff that Dominick and I are bringing to this podcast, are shortcuts into all of that.
Yeah. I mean, like you can start listening for whatever you might consider to be selfish reasons, and then recognize like, oh, wow, like you can move towards that state of, wow, maybe this is the right thing to do, right? That's how a lot of guys get into this stuff, and it's all good.
Be selfish. I dare you. Do it.
Yes.
Be selfish. Get better.
Yeah. And also be selfish with the intention of like maybe elevating that at a certain point too.
It'll happen. What's the guarantee? Do you guarantee that if they listen to 10 podcasts, then you guarantee that they're going to elevate and not be selfish?
Bryan, you are guaranteeing that. That's your guarantee. I'll let you stand behind that one, man.
Beautiful.
If you want to like sink your teeth into some like super intellectual episodes, right? If like you are a really heady person, you value the left brain stuff, 3 episodes to go into would be Indistractable with Nir Eyal. So Indistractable is a Wall Street Journal best-selling book about like how to become super focused, hyper-focused to get things done in your life. And Nir Eyal, that was a really popular episode. Scott Young wrote the book Ultra Learning, how to become like super skilled at learning how to learn. That was like a action-packed, meaty episode. And then Giovanni Beckford did the episode called Your Ultimate Guide to Reading and Retaining Information on Books. And Giovanni is like got this crazy system that allows him to consume 60 to 100 books a year and retain like a good percentage of the information through his note-taking process, through how he chooses his books, through how he stages his books, how he reads them throughout the course of the day. If like you're really looking for some like intellectual info, those are 3 really good episodes to start with.
One of the things that I get most out of doing this podcast is taking the genius from others, and Giovanni's a great example of that, and incorporating that into my life. And now how I buy books, like what medium I buy them on. Is it a hardcover, or is it a soft cover, or is it a audiobook, or is it a Kindle? Is purely based on that podcast that we did with Giovanni.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Like some of his stuff has really stayed with me too. We do a lot of episodes around men's work and how to define what it means to be a man, you defining your own definition of being a man, because most of us have just been given a definition of what a man is. So some of the places that you can go to consciously define what it means to be a man for you, we have a number of episodes with John O'Connor, who's a men's coach. He was my coach for 3 years, Bryan's coach for the last 2 years. We've done 2 episodes with him. We just recently released an episode with David Waldis, who's my coach of the last 2 years. We did a 2-part series with Cleo Stiller, a live event recording around her book called Modern Manhood, which was a really popular couple episodes that we did with her. So Modern Manhood, Cleo Stiller. And then we have one called Break These BS Rules of Being a Man. Break These BS Rules of Being a Man. And there's a free download on doinnerwork.com/resources that goes along with the 5 rules, the BS rules of being a man. Oh, and one more episode is, this one's in our top 5 most downloaded, John Wineland, The Art of Leadership, like Masculine Leadership. That was one of our most popular.
That's one that you did with him alone. So which is fun because Dominick does some of these podcasts on his own. And I get to be a fan at that point. I get to put my headphones in, go for a run and listen. And that one with John Wineland was awesome. I love that one. Even the discussion about Clayton Kershaw being a pitcher and high performance. Like John Wineland is such a versatile dude because he's so deep emotionally, but he can talk at the sports at the Clayton Kershaw level. And it's great. I loved it.
Love it, dude. One last category to hit would be just around like the passion category around sexuality. We talk a lot about being intentional with your relationship to porn, with your relationship to sex. Our most popular episodes in that respect are a 2-part series, interview series that I did with Lisa Ann. Lisa Ann is a friend and like a guide to our show. She's also one of the top 10 most downloaded porn stars in the world. She's recently retired over the last, I think, 6 months or so. And she's a champion for workers' rights in the porn world where there are no rights. And the 2-part series that we did is she exposed the secrets in the backstage world of porn that they don't want you to know. the videos that they're creating, their marketing techniques, how they're leading you down a path of unconscious consumption that's leading you to consume more and more porn that gets you off, but you don't necessarily feel good about. You may even feel like some self-loathing after you're done with it. Or like the porn you were watching 3 years ago needs to be like 10 times more intense now for you to get the same effect as 3 years ago. Those episodes with Lisa Ann are really powerful. And then Bryan and I did, I think within our first 15 episodes, like the 5 stages that a man goes through with respect to his porn journey. And most guys get stuck on stage number 3, which is drifting. And then we also have an episode called Take the 30-Day No Porn Challenge, which is something that got a lot of attention. Some of the guys took it. My 30-day no porn challenge turned into a 6-month no porn challenge, which was great. I just broke it like about a week or 2 ago, but very much on my own choice.
I'm not sure if I should congratulate you or I'm just going to let that one sit there.
There's a lot more you can go through, but we gave you a bunch to check in on.
Yeah, Dominic, one more on those. It was a more recent one with Alexa Martinez, and she's a friend of ours and a sex coach. And she gave us one piece of advice that I've brought into my life, and it has been groundbreaking. And it's this idea of having a weekly relationship board meeting where we talk about everything that's going on. And it takes, Beck and I have been doing this for the last month or 2 now, and it takes maybe 15, 20 minutes on a Sunday evening. And we talk about what's coming up in the week, how we both could have shown up better for each other, what we want in life in different parts of our lives. And so she talks about that in detail during that podcast. And that's been a game changer for me.
Awesome. I love that one. And as soon as I end up in relationship, that will be a part of my ritual too.
Yeah.
So quickly hitting on this concept of emotional literacy emotional fluency actually is what I would call it, before we get to the resources that are available for you on doinnerwork.com. /resources that you can download to help you on your journey. So like I said before, most men have been taught at a very early age that emotions are the enemy to performance. Don't cry, don't be a pussy, don't feel insecure, don't feel weakness, don't feel like you should always be courageous, always be strong, keep it inside. And what that leads to over the course of your life is a complete disconnection of knowing what's going on inside of you. The analogy I like to give is if your emotional spectrum is a football field where the 50-yard line is neutral, like feeling no emotions, one end zone, the darkest negative emotions, like hell and hopelessness and depression. And the other end zone is, like the height of positive emotions, bliss, joy, gratitude, right? Love. And then, fill in the blanks everywhere in between. Most of us over the course of our lives have shrunk our window of emotions, our range of emotions to just a few inches on either side of the 50-yard line, right? Because I never wanted to feel pain. I never wanted to feel anxious or afraid. So I would numb it out for me through sexuality, like through sexting or through masturbation. A lot of guys will do it through drugs, too much eating, alcoholism, or, workaholism to avoid. And what happens over time is as we shrink our capacity to feel the negative stuff, we also don't feel the bright side of life. We don't even really enjoy our accomplishments. We're unable to go to those deeper places of love or passion with our romantic partners. We're unable to feel connected to our purpose because a numbed out guy can't really be living a life of purpose or intentionality or his calling. He's just not calibrated to it. So when we say emotional fluency, it's deeper than literacy. Like literacy is just about, like if you think about the definition of literacy, it's like I can read. Fluency is like mastery, right? And emotional fluency is the ability to feel a feeling, to name that feeling, the ability to be with that feeling, the ability to express that feeling, and then the ability to shift that feeling if desired, right? Like the ability to feel anxious, the ability to name it and know where it exists in your body, the ability to be with it instead of pivoting away from it so quickly, the ability to express it, and then the ability to shift it once you fully have felt it to something maybe like more powerful for you. That is what we're talking about when it comes to emotional fluency.
And there's a speed to this too, because when we can feel that and we recognize there's an intelligence in that, we can make better decisions. I had a time where I had 100 to-do things for my company. I went to an event and I felt sad after the event. I said, what the hell? Like, why am I feeling sad? Now, in a previous version of Bryan, I would have not allowed myself to feel sad. I just wouldn't have picked up on it.
Yep.
But in this case, I said, interesting. Like, why am I feeling sad here? And I recognized in that moment that I was sad because I didn't have the same kind of team that the person on stage had. And I took that 100 things, 100 to-do lists off the plate, and I said, I need to focus on who my team is and who I'm working with. And that was a game changer for me. That was just one really quick example that completely changed the next 3 months of work that I did. If I didn't recognize that, I would have kept going down that list of 100 and doing the things that didn't quite matter. And when we talk about doing the inner work, I believe that life is an experiment in figuring out what matters most to us.
That's right.
And we can't figure out what matters most to us unless we can feel.
Dude, and the speed thing is so central to this idea of performance, right? Because like I know a lot of our newer listeners are going to be coming in through the lens of how do I optimize my performance? And so many guys are like overweighted in their head, in the left brain, intellectualizing everything. Whenever like a big decision has to be made, you know, like some super calculator comes out and churns out every possible negative scenario and goes through like all the iterations. And guys are fucking slow and exhausted when it comes to making these big decisions because they have to like navigate and calculate every fucking thing that could possibly happen. When you've developed emotional fluency, there's a deeper sense of attunement to, does this feel right or not? Does this feel wrong? Or where are the holes in this thing? So now in my life, I'm able to move at rapid speed because it's like, oh, that's a client I know that is good for their word. I want to take that money. I also want to make sure that like those people succeed. Like I know that I will get joy out of working with them. I don't work with clients that drain me anymore, right? Like I know the book I'm going to write because it feels good for me. I don't have to think it through and I'm impassioned writing it. That's why I've been able to write 2 books in the last 2 or 3 years, right? So when you develop this emotional fluency, things happen faster and better, and it gets you out of your head. And it also is a much more energizing way of living.
Yeah, it's more fun.
All right. So the last place that we want to take you are the treasure trove of resources that we have available for free download at doinnerwork.com/resources. So many of our episodes have so much information in them that many of you, our listeners, have asked us, like, could you synthesize that, summarize for us, put it into a 1-page PDF? So on doinnerwork.com/resources, we have book lists like 12 books every man must read, 18 books every leader must read, 15 books written by women that we love, available for download. We have guided meditations from our Design the Next Year of Your Life, Design the Next Decade of Your Life, visualization meditations. Corey Muscara, who is our meditation guru, we've brought on here twice to talk about the basics of meditation, created a meditation for us that's guided for free download. And we also have some other downloads around 5 ways to last longer in bed, and then 5 practices to make you a mentally tougher man.
I have that one pinned on my wall.
Yeah. How's that going for you, buddy?
I'm looking for a frame. It looks very weird. It's a tack.
Listen, yeah, if that's not for you. I know that you, the listener, don't need the 5 ways to last longer in bed, but if a friend of yours needs to download it, that's certainly available.
Yeah, it's for a friend. It's always for a friend. Yep.
Yeah. 5 practices to become a mentally tougher man. Like there's plenty of resources there for you to get started on your inner work journey. Bryan, is there anything else that we forgot? I mean, there's a lot that a lot of questions that I wrote down that we didn't answer, but we're already at an hour here, man. I mean, is there anything else that we need to?
I knew condensing a year and a half into 60 minutes was going to be a tough job, but I think we covered off on a lot of it. Plenty. If I'm a new listener listening to this, I am excited and overwhelmed right now at the same time. So I think if we leave it here, and we can always do a part 2.
Sounds good, brother. And if you're still listening, we love the fact that you are on this journey with us of discovering and living the great man within you. Hey, Bryan and I wanted to thank you for the ratings and reviews that you leave us. We read every single one of them, and they're so helpful in helping us to understand what resonates with you and helps us determine which topics that we use in the future. So if you found this episode to be of particular value to you, will you please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so that we know that this is the kind of topic you want to hear more about? And it also helps other prospective listeners to figure out where they can dive in first. Thank you.